Hi, and welcome to the Higher Education Access Corner. I'm one of your co-hosts with our Hot Topic segment, Tiffanie DeVan.
And I'm Deanna Brown.
And today's hot topic, we are going to talking about schools that are closing, post-secondary schools that are closing. We're also going to be talking about the struggling decline in enrollment at colleges and universities. A lot of information is out there right now, but not everyone is aware of it. So Deanna and I thought this would be a great topic. And Deanna, I'll go ahead and let you kick this off.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. I didn't realize the number of schools that have been closing. And what we found was that since 2016, 91 U.S. private colleges have closed or merged with other schools or announced plans to close. So I thought that this would be an interesting topic to talk about because it's definitely something that's affecting a lot of students and communities. And I think I just wanted to talk about, some of the reasons why this is happening, and are there things that communities can kind of do to kind of help schools and students with this epidemic. So one of the things that we found when we were looking at this topic is that part of the reason why some schools are struggling, of course, due to the pandemic, there was a lot of, fiscal impact on a lot of schools. So that kind of affected schools that had already been struggling financially. And then with the pandemic, that just added on to their struggles. One of the things that I think is also interesting is that in 2025, there is projected to be a pretty big enrollment cliff where the amount of students that are projected to graduate from high school is going to really decline. So, how do we think that's really going to impact schools?
Right. All good points. And it's when you said the class of 2025, I found it interesting. There was a report. It was on college. What is it? College Cliff Dive? College Dive? Higher Ed Dive. Let me get that right. Higher Ed Dive. And they were talking, and it was saying for the graduating class of 2025 is going to be one of the smallest classes because there were less students born at that time. And that was interesting. So again, like you said, it's declining. But if that's going to be one of the lowest graduating classes, where does that put those post-secondary schools at?
And when you think about it, you think about, okay, why is that class being affected? Go back. That was probably around the time of 2008, 2007 recession, where due to various reasons, people weren't having as many kids. And now 2025,
think about that.
We are, seeing that impact.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the things that I was thinking about is maybe schools should start looking at more non-traditional students as a way to increase enrollment. I know we always, focus on the incoming high school students as traditional college students, but based on the changing, demographics with this pending enrollment cliff, maybe that is something that schools can look at, to kind of get more students in, is, looking at the more non-traditional students that may want additional training, maybe want to change a career path and things like that. That could be definitely something that, schools could look at.
So here's a question I have for you, though. So I agree with that. But at the same time, there are so many schools closing for different reasons, and closing because of the declining enrollment, like we're talking about. But then there are the costs. So regardless of who your population is, a lot of folks are thinking that the cost of an education is just too expensive. And some are saying, is it worth it? Or I can't do it right now. I can't incorporate that into my budget. And tuition continues to go up. So if tuition is increasing, if the resources or financial aid and things like that aren't increasing at the same pace, I think it makes it a little more difficult. So I think there's an issue with that, or a barrier with that. Also, in addition to that, you have like COVID-19. After the pandemic, a lot of schools who possibly were struggling, they haven't all rebounded yet. So even though they could target a different population, how do they still figure out how to get the funding that is necessary? How can you still pay all of the costs at a school with tuition going? Your tuition is going to keep rising, but you don't have the people there with the resources. And I do know, like from the federal stimulus funds that a lot of the schools got post-pandemic, I think they had to spend those funds now by, I think it was like May 2023. So the schools that did receive the funding from COVID-19 and part of the stimulus relief, that funding or that they received pretty much going into these next school years, it's no longer really going to be there. So again, how are the students, the schools sustaining them? And for all of our listeners, Diona and I really don't have the answer, but we figured it's a great discussion, great talking points, and things that everybody should be on the lookout for. Because if you're someone going to school, if you're someone in your communities, if you're someone, you have kids who are going to school, you want to kind of start thinking now, what does that future look like? If you're planning to go to some type of post-secondary school, you want to go into a different career, like you mentioned, like with those non-traditional students. How do you prepare and things like that? For I know also for the declining enrollment portion, if we're just looking at schools who are closing because or have closed because of the declining enrollment, and in Googling some things and looking at some of the different sites that are out there, a lot of students still stick to or families are still sticking to it's just too expensive and it's not worth it. So again, I think that goes back to some of our previous conversations where we had to kind of say, they have to figure out what is their best option post high school, or what's going to be their rate of return. What's the return on their investment, I should say? What makes it worth it for them? And can they find an affordable school or affordable means for actually getting that degree completed or that certification completed?
Right. And I think at the end of the day, just like any market, you're going to have market correction. So based on supply and demand, some of these schools may not make it. There's a lot of schools out there. There's a lot of competition. So when there's a decline in enrollment, decline in supply of students that are wanting post-secondary education, you are going to have, unfortunately, some colleges are going to have to close because they just don't have the number of students that want to attend those schools in order to remain open. However, for the public schools, I think this is where, state governments and the schools themselves are really going to have to look to see what are some things that they can do to cut costs. I know here in Pennsylvania, we have recently had a merger of some of the state schools. And I think part of that was probably due to declining enrollment at some of the individual campuses. And I know just from doing some research on this topic, some other states have also experienced this, such as Alaska, Georgia, Wisconsin, Connecticut, Iowa, and Arkansas. So some of those states have already consolidated their state schools, they're looking at steps to do so. So those are definitely some things that policymakers and legislators are going to have to take a look at to see, what type of additional supplements they can do to make sure that their public schools at least are on good footing going forward.
And then for those who hopefully our Pennsylvania listeners are aware of this, but for those who don't know, like you mentioned, it was our PASHE schools. So the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, they integrated 6 institutions and made them 2.
Right.
So we now have Penn West, or Pennsylvania Western University, which is the official title, which includes California University, Clarion University, and Edinburgh. So they've kind of combined. And then Commonwealth University of PA incorporated Bloomsburg, Lock Haven, and Mansfield universities. And by them doing so, I remember there was a lot of chatter, a lot of talk about it, like the pros and cons.
Right.
And there were some alumni who were absolutely adamant that they did not want this merger. They wanted to preserve the history of their schools, the legacy of their individual schools. Some were thinking, well, it's just going to make it a mess. It's going to make it a lot of other things. And then I was reading where as time went on and they realized, well, some of these schools just may not survive without it. Then their opinions kind of shifted to say, well, you know what, we can still preserve it. And by them doing the integration of the 2 schools, they still can maintain a certain piece of their own identities, but they have the financial support to be able to go on. I also remember some of the purpose of the integration they were talking about. They'd also be able to provide extended programs while still maintaining the characteristics of their individual ones. They were able to capitalize on the strengths of each school. So if I'm a part of one of those 3 and one campus has something that's, strong here and another there, students have more options available to them. They had more opportunities to basically serve their students.
Right.
And one of the most important things, the schools did not have to close. So my personal opinion is I think it was a good thing.
Absolutely.
I am not an alumni of any of those, but I've now talked to some alumni and they do like the fact that the schools are still there,
right?
That their school is still existing and is still thriving. So I think the integration, not just with the PASHE schools that were there, the fact that the other states are doing them, it does allow the opportunity for students to continue on. Think about the student who started at one of these schools, not just one of the PASHE schools, but one of these other schools that are considering closing or about to leave, about to shut down, what happens if you're a junior or a senior? Like you kind of started, you forged friendships, relationships. You've been possibly doing some networking, your programs of study, you're well into your major courses and all of that. And then abruptly you're being told, hey, the school is closing. How do you finish your program? What if you didn't have the funding? What if you already had plans to say, hey, I'm going to graduate this year and then this year, when, next year, and, I already have an internship set up, or I already have a residency program that I'm going to go straight into. All of those things could possibly change. So it's kind of scary if you're told it's going to close. So if you have a chance for it to stay open through a merger or some type of integration, I think it could be a little reassuring for those students, for those families who've invested. There was a study, they were saying over half of the students who experienced a college closure just did not return. So it was like 52.9% is what was showing. And that came from bestcolleges.com is where I saw that at. But they just don't even go. Yeah. So go back. And that's kind of disheartening because your intention was to finish. And then there are those roadblocks and those obstacles that kind of slow you down. Yeah. And you never want someone to kind of kill their dreams. I always say, I'm not here to kill anybody's dreams or crush their goals. But that's a scary place to be in, especially when your financial resources are limited. And then what happens if you have to transfer? Right. If you have to transfer school, do all your credits transfer with you? How does the financial aid shift with you? So are there more barriers that are put in place for a student that are out there?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to consider here. And, there are resources out there. It's just a matter of, going after those resources to make sure that they have the information in place to be able to get to another school if that unfortunately happens while they're in the middle of their program. I think another thing that we need to talk about in this discussion is the impact on communities from school closures. So, when the college closes, if that does happen, it's not just the students and the parents, of course, that are impacted, but also, job losses in that community. You always have in some areas, these colleges are located in small towns where that college is the heart of that community. So it really can impact the economy of these small municipalities, lower tax revenue, and then reduce cultural opportunities. And that's something that came up in one of the articles. And that's something I didn't think about. But, that is so true. A lot of the colleges are so many hubs for different speaking events and having, different speakers come in, different conversations, different cultural events that they host. So, and I really didn't think about that when talking about, the impact of the community when the schools close and how that would impact things as well.
Because it brings an extra, what I would call flavor into, the area and where you live. And just think about, we're kind of centrally located here in the Harrisburg area, but think about the different schools and that are here and how often do we run across something where, hey, someone is bringing something to the, performing arts area. Someone is bringing this. So it's everything from your arts to your politics to just a little bit of everything that comes into, and it's open to the public. So they bring it to the communities. They have job fairs. They have a lot of things that your community can benefit with. So I do agree. That's definitely something that does impact the communities. It also impacts the staff. Like think about the people who work there. Someone who's been working there for decades or just started their career here and says, I really want to grow here and possibly retire from this location. Now, all of a sudden, your plans that you had for your future are drastically changed because of school. And it's not like that's a unique thing. Sometimes that happens with all businesses. Okay, here's a closure. You have to find some place to start, but you're starting over again. There's that uncertainty that does take place. And, it sort of affects the students. It affects the staff, like you said, the communities, the industries that we're in. So these school closures can definitely impact people. A couple of things that we were talking about earlier is before the podcast started is what do people do? What's the impact and what are some of the things we can do? And I'll start from a student standpoint. Some of the things that a student could possibly do is continue before they've even chosen that school, really dig deep, not only into is it a good fit for them financially, but see if you can learn information about how financially sound these schools are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I can't say that, a student who's going in, a pending freshman, is going to get all of the answers that they need because something can shift.
Right.
immediately and then change that once the student has begun. Think of that person who, for pandemic reasons. There are schools that may have been thinking, okay, we have a plan, we'll make it. Then the pandemic hit and that kind of just blew all those plans out of the water. So nothing is foolproof, but I definitely think if you can do your research to start incorporating questions like, well, how financially sound do you think the university is or the school is? Do your own research to make sure that the school isn't struggling or on the fence. And if they are, can they guarantee that, there's a contingency plan? Hey, if things happen, can I be certain that all of the credits and the courses that I'm taking are transferable credits?
Right.
Are you taking classes, even your non-elective courses? Are they courses that if you had to transfer to another school, will they all go with you?
Right.
How does it affect your financial aid? Well, if the school closed, you had student loans, what happens to them? Again, a lot of students who go to these schools, if the schools are closing, what's the likelihood of them actually paying back their student loans?
Right.
Because a lot of times student loan defaults, people default on their student loans. More people default on their student loans who did not complete their program as opposed to those who did.
Right.
So possibly higher default rates for those students who don't. But those students who don't, they always want to double check to make sure that there are resources that could possibly be there to assist them. Check with their servicers to find out, hey, will I qualify for some type of student loan forgiveness?
Right.
And in the past, I know sometimes those schools that have closed abruptly due to poor management, mismanagement, or some type of issue that was going on with the schools, some of those students did qualify for student loan forgiveness
and students
for that reason.
Definitely, yes, contact your servicer to start that process. As soon as you know that school is closing, students should definitely contact your servicer because they may be able to get those student loans forgiven. So that's definitely something that they should take a look at.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And then again, if they're adamant about getting their program completed, don't stop. Look for another school. Just because you had to there was like some pebbles thrown in your path on the road to your success doesn't mean that, you fall down and you don't get back up, continue to complete your goals. And then also look out to your resources. Every state has a guarantee agency that's out there. So call your FIA, call your Department of Education, call those other schools to find out what things can we do to kind of help those students along to get back on track. And I know you also had some things that you were talking about, other things that folks could possibly do outside of the students to kind of help with the school closures or to avoid. What can your communities do?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like we talked about earlier, I think that there's definitely a role for state governments to play with funding. But then I also think that it might be a situation where some schools may have to reimagine, maybe some of the courses and the curriculum that they are offering, partner with the business community in those localities to see what kind of programs that they can tailor for that particular workforce in that area. And hopefully that will provide some stability to some of those schools because, yes, they may have to cut down on the number of programs that they're offering, but they may be able to have a better program that will fit the needs of that community, just maybe at a smaller program of study, for some of the different curriculum things that they're offering. So I think that that's definitely something that, schools can look at and partner with the communities to try to see what they can do to, meet the needs of everyone.
Mm-hmm. And then also, I think some of the things that the schools could possibly do. All schools may not want to hear this. Cut your costs as much as you can.
Administration. That's a big one.
Sometimes you have to look for, you got to make some hard decisions on how you're going to cut your costs. And I know, if you go to a lot of these schools, there are so many things that make it attractive to a student because they need the students to attend. Tuition is one of the major things that are helping schools stay viable because if their tuition costs, if you have your enrollment up, you're going to have more tuition. And tuition is covering a lot of these expenses that are out there. But what's attracting the students? Sometimes it's the beautiful campus. Sometimes it's all these extra amenities. And the students are like, wow, well, they have these meal plans. They have this. They have a whole theater over here. They have all of these extra things. Are there ways that schools can kind of cut those costs for the students, but still make it appealing to them? You know what? You want to appeal to them for reasons to come to your school. beyond the things that are going to kind of like break the bank for them. So sometimes the schools have to figure out how to cut your administrative costs, how to cut some other things that are out there. And if they can do it and don't necessarily push those expenses to the students. And again, I don't know if that's a popular thing or if schools will not, but if it can make or break a decision with whether or not you stay open or you don't, or possibly it can increase your enrollment, I think it's definitely something that is worth considering. One thing for certain, there's still a trend that's going on with these post-secondary schools. They're still closing. There's still going to be mergers that are happening. The decline is still there, although some schools, I know last year they said, did report some increases in their enrollment. But if your graduating class for 2025 is expected to be much smaller and you don't have a plan, what's that look like?
Right. And one of the things that we talked about earlier, and I don't know if it was before the podcast or we talked about it earlier here, was maybe looking at, more non-traditional students. That might be something that schools can take a look at, because if you know that you're going to have that declining enrollment for the high school graduates, what about looking at more of the older population to see if you have programs that could attract, people that want to get retrained in various things, come back for second degrees, things like that. Reach out to local businesses in the area to see what their needs are. Maybe look at particular, companies that offer tuition reimbursement to their employees and market more to that, population of students to attract more students into the institutions. So I think it's going to definitely be very challenging for admissions offices to figure out how they are going to react to this different market trend with this enrollment cliff.
And I think we kind of wrapped it up. I think you kind of wrapped it up really well. I do say at the end of the day, we want them all to win. We need the schools to be here. Students need them. The communities need them. Everyone needs them to be there. And we want the students to have all the opportunities, and we want them to have choices, whether we're talking a post-secondary school, that it's private, public, whatever it is. We want the student to have those options, and we need them to be around. So for those of you who are listening to us, keep in mind that we do know that there are some struggles that are out there with the schools. There's some struggles with the students, with the finances, but hopefully things will get better. Talk to the schools, talk to the communities, talk to your legislators to find out what can be done. What can they do on their end? What can we do on our end? At the end of the day, we want the enrollment to increase. We want the students to be happy. Anything else before we kind of?
No, I think we kind of dived in and we talked about what's going on, make people aware of this issue. So hopefully with more awareness too, more communities can pull together to see how we can support these post-secondary schools get through this.
Absolutely. And then finally, I think a great way to end is again to reiterate to that student who might be in a position right now where they feel where their school could possibly be closing or they're in jeopardy. Reach out to your resources. Talk to the financial aid offices that are out there. Don't stop your program of study if you do not have to. Go back, do a transfer, do whatever you need to do to complete your program of study. We wish you all success. We thank you for joining us at the Higher Education Access Corner, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.